Get out of my fucking city! Hey, fuck you! What fucking freedom have you lost? What freedom have you lost? Tell me a freedom you've lost. I lost my mind because I haven't slept in 5 fucking days. It has to fucking stop.
Then it stops when the government lifts the mandates.
You fucking idiot! The mandates are provincial, not federal! The mandates! If you're mad about wearing a mask or getting a fucking vaccine, go talk to Doug Ford!
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Brian, and this is Brian's Badger Lodge. Kind of a last-minute change in the schedule. I am sorry that I am not Hannah. Hannah's normal HBR talk show is going to be postponed because she is snowed in Ohio, which I didn't think was a thing that could happen. But yeah, here we are. So Hannah's fine. There's no need to worry about it. It's just that she's not going to be able to make it to do any shows today. And so I have been asked to do something, anything in her stead. And so I'm here. And I thought that this would be a good opportunity to host a call-in show so you guys can call in with any statements, questions, or thoughts that you have either on the subject that I have chosen for today's show or on any other subject that you're interested in, whatever, right? We're open here. We'll take it. And yeah, feel free to call in by going to the description of this video. You will see a link to Discord, and click on that link and it should take you into the Honey Badger Radio call-in show Discord server, where you will then hop into the voice chat with Darth Sonic 413, and he will essentially like make sure that your audio is working okay, and you know that you're not a troll. Not that I care if somebody wants to troll. I just think it's a waste of time for you and me. And that you know you're going to be able to speak clearly, you speak the English language and all of that. So there is a link in the description. Hop in there and then join us on the call. Okay. So I want to first give a shout out to John Levy. He is a man with a pretty cool channel called Royal Road. Royal is spelled R-O-I-L. And he and I have been doing a podcast bi-weekly where, you know, we talk about various topics which are used to promote his Royal product, which is kind of a, let's say, a meta social media platform. It's worth looking at. I would suggest you check it out. Anyway, he gave me this article and this Reddit post, which I wanted to look into a little bit more and do this with you guys. So we're going to be talking about boys in education. Okay. And how bad is this problem? How many people acknowledge this problem? And what are some additional side effects of this problem that people may not be aware of? Okay. So, if you want to talk about education or anything really, I would suggest you again go to the link in the description and hop into the Discord so that you can air your thoughts, give us your hot takes live on the air. Okay. So this is from the men's rights Reddit. I admittedly don't go to men's rights Reddit that often. I do occasionally to find news stories and just check in, see what people are talking about. But I'm not on here very frequently at all. I mostly discuss men's issues from my own perspective, not informed, obviously, by the data that gets shared a lot on places like the men's rights Reddit. But I'm usually thinking about things in my own way and bring them up on the show. And I talked, with Allison about them. I think that we have a even more unique perspective in some ways than the Reddit's does. But anyway, so this was shared on men's rights Reddit. It was an article, I guess you could say an entry on a website called collegescholarships.org, where they talk about the government grants given to women looking to enroll in colleges and universities. And the poster of this Reddit thread says the following, in case you're listening and you're not looking at this, okay? 6 out of 10 college freshmen are women. So women are a majority in college campuses. So there are more and more scholarship programs and grants available that cater exclusively to women needing funding for college. Aren't demographic-based scholarships / grants supposed to help the underrepresented demographic group? Of course, I'm going to presume that that's a rhetorical question. The purpose of Freudian slip, demographic-based scholarships and grants is not necessarily to help the underrepresented demographic group. But maybe some of you guys don't believe that, but I do think that's how it shakes out. Why do we know this? Well, because right now, more women are enrolled in college than men, and there are still only scholarships available for women based on them being women. Men don't have any. Now, if you happen to be a black man or a native man or a Latino man, there might be scholarships for you based on those criteria, like being Latino, being black, being native, but not because you're a man. And so women are more likely to get scholarships that are just for them, and minorities are more likely to get scholarships depending on the minority, because there's no Asian scholarship out there, you know. But if you fit the criteria, then yes, you might be able to find some additional financial support from governments, but not just governments, also from corporations and various foundations and charities that are looking to try and get more people into university. And by people, I mean women. So, because women are the only people and men are not. So let's look a little bit deeper into this. Of course, they're asking for people's thoughts, and there is a lot of interesting posts, but I want to get into the actual article itself. So this is from collegescholarships.org. It is entitled Government Grants for Women. 6 out of 10 college freshmen are women, so there are more and more scholarship programs and grants available that cater exclusively to women needing funding for college. Various organizations support financial aid initiatives for women, including advocacy groups, government agencies, and corporate benefactors. Just like I said, it's not just the state. There are corporations and, of course, women's advocacy groups. So, like, literally feminist organizations, and I know this shouldn't be a surprise to you guys by now, okay? Feminist organizations exclusively raise funds, lobby and agitate for more money to be directed to women, even when women are disproportionately earning degrees and going to college. In fact, I remember a statistic, a recent one, where I learned that the most educated, this doesn't mean necessarily best qualified, but we can get into the problems of like the shortcomings of education itself a little bit later. The most educated people are black women. What does that mean? Well, that means that black women are earning more degrees than black men. And white men, well, no, not necessarily white men, but like in I guess you could say in proportion they are. But there are fewer black women than white men, you know, in the population, but more black women are getting degrees. And this is going to create problems. And we'll get into some of those problems in a moment. But just bear in mind that even though more women are going to college and more women are getting financial support for going to college, and they're doing it more than men, none of these groups think that there's a problem, and and none of these there's a problem with these outcomes, with these drives, and that it should that something might need to be done to help men. There's no issue there. Nobody sees it, right? I mean, they literally said most people who are in college are women, therefore we need to give more money to women. What? But that's what they're saying with a straight face without even seeing what's wrong with that, okay? I mean, assuming that they care about equality. I don't. honestly don't care about equality, but they do. And so it's even stranger that they care about equality enough that they would want more women in universities, but they're not seeing that it's actually women are fine and that maybe men need help now because, historical oppression. Programs are in place for diverse groups of women who need financial assistance. Some are earmarked for women returning to higher education. So if a woman, didn't finish college or never went and she decides to go back, they actually have scholarships for them. So we're talking about what are probably adults who probably had jobs, one would hope, and could potentially pay their way through college without support, are still getting support. I mean, like if you're 18 and you're going to college and you need financial aid, I can understand that, even if I don't know that. I mean, even if I personally am not certain that financial aid is what people need. But like, I can understand it if you're young. But if you've been like in the workforce or you were married or whatever, do you still need financial aid? Well, of course, that's what they say, because that's what this is all about. It's about, I don't even know if it's about equality of outcome. I don't, because this is not an equality of outcome situation. So I think this is just about doing what feminists always do, which is essentially asking men, because I guarantee you the bulk of this money comes out of the pockets of men, either willingly or unwillingly, and it gets redirected to women. It's the redistribution of wealth. I've actually heard feminists use the phrase redistribution of wealth, by the way, when it refers to what women should be getting. They're literally talking about doing that, which again, shouldn't be a surprise to people, but somehow still is. Okay. Some are earmarked for women returning to higher education, while others carry age requirements that facilitate funding for adult students. Philanthropic groups and individuals who care about women's causes, feminists, provide educational assistance that enables women to excel. Individual colleges and universities also include gender-based financial aid opportunities within their campus-based assistance portfolios. So there's they throw everything and the kitchen sink at women to ensure that they can go to college. Now, one of the things that was brought up that I want to mention, because I thought it was interesting, by someone that I know, who I was talking to about this a little while ago, said that, even let us for a moment presume that women were historically kept out of college. They weren't. It's not the case. But the necessities of our lives at the time were set up in such a way that women were just more likely to be less interested in going to college than men. And of course, there are reasons for this that I'll get into later, which have nothing to do with sexism or misogyny at all. But let's assume for a moment that women were legitimately, for whatever reason, either through cultural or social pressure or the patriarchy, kept out of college in the past, and that this is just a way to level the playing field, right? We're taking into account historical oppression of women, okay? Such as it is. In the last time that men were more likely to get college degrees than women, the last time it was disproportionate, in order for that to have been the case, the people who were enjoying the benefits of those additional degrees or whatever would have to have been born in the 1950s. So we're looking at a very, very old trend. So when men had more degrees than women was probably in the 1960s or 70s, because if they were born in the 50s, then, right? So let's say the 60s or 70s is when there were more degrees being brought home by men than women. Of course, at that time, having a college education was completely different from what it is now, because in those periods, people would go to college because they wanted a specific kind of career that only a college or university education could give them. So they were going to go into medicine or law or something kind of like high-end tech, science, etc., right? So it's not like today where people go to college for everything. And of course, the quality of their education is far worse than it was. But I mean, back then, that was when men were going more. And the difference was something like 8 or 9%. That was basically like, so women were still going to college. It's just that there were slightly more men going. And let's be real, a lot of the time when women were going to college, they were going to college to look for men that were in college. That was actually the reason for it in many cases, right? So like, that was then. Now it's the same thing. 6 out of 10 college freshmen are women. So now it's just the same statistics, but reversed. Now men are 10% in the hole, about 9-10%, something like that. You know, it's a little whatever. It's right in there, right in that ballpark, right? And women are earning that much more than men, but that's not a problem today. We don't think that that's a big deal. In fact, all of these groups that advocate women going to college and getting more money and getting money from the state, which means getting money from men's pockets or getting money from corporate interests, and, you know, these feminist groups that raise money and also demand and agitate for other corporations and other government bodies to give women money. Well, they think that what happened in the 60s and 70s was absolutely unforgivable and had to change, but today it's not a problem. Nobody's saying that there needs to be a grant for men, because as soon as we do, then the whole house of cards comes falling down, right? Because all of a sudden we're realizing that women don't really need as much support as feminists claim. And then like when you add on top of that, and here's where the real problems come in, okay? So college is stupid anyways at this point. So let's just get that out of the way. College is useless. The only thing it's going to do is put you in debt. The only exception, because I know this is like what I'm saying is hyperbolic to some degree, and I'm sure that someone is going to say, well, what if I want to be a lawyer or a doctor? Well, obviously that still applies, but the quality of education in universities and colleges in general is far worse than it used to be, regardless of what you were looking for. And I think the blame for this falls squarely on public education, because public education, elementary school and high school, is not doing a sufficient job of preparing children for their adulthood, their inevitable growth into adolescence and then adulthood through education. So the quality of education in general is down. Like colleges now have to teach kids things that high schools were supposed to be teaching them, because high schools are now teaching kids things that elementary schools or middle schools were supposed to be teaching them, because middle schools are now teaching kids things that elementary schools should have been teaching them. You see what I'm saying? So the quality of education in general is lower. And I know that there, you know, like we can get into a school choice discussion and all that, but that's kind of like neither here nor there. I mean, that would, in my opinion, that's something we should advocate for, because if we want to give people their best chance, we have to give them the best possible education. But education alone, which is often a thing that feminists and leftists bring up, well, we just need to better educate kids. Well, the problem is that education sucks. It sucks really bad. And you could get, I would personally say we should be looking at teachers unions. We should be looking at what's being taught in schools. A lot of schools are way behind. They're like teaching things shit from like that was maybe relevant in the 1970s. And I am not kidding. I've seen it. I took a computer course when I was in high school that used computers I had never seen before because they were so fucking old. Right. And I couldn't use that. Like they were showing me how to do shorthand. You know what that is? Of course you don't, because it's 2022. Like, but shorthand was what secretaries used to use to take notes for their boss. I literally learned shorthand when I was in high school in like the early 90s. Makes no sense. Nobody was doing that. Like, nobody, right? So there is a serious problem in education with the quality of education itself. So that's the first thing I want to get out of the way, is that college is kind of shit right now anyway. And like, no one is allowed to fail anyone, because they don't want to essentially be called racist or sexist. So everyone passes, right? Usually there's no standardized testing. It's like spotty, like it still happens in some places, and in others they don't do it at all. And so like there's no observation of merit. But even if you like take all that and put it aside, what's going to happen to women who go to university or go to college, even if they go to a really great Ivy League school? They go to Yale, they go to Harvard, they go to Oxford, because this isn't just a problem in the United States, right? What's going to happen to those women if they even graduate? Because a large number of people drop out of college. But let's say that they make it all the way through. We could even say that they do well, right? They get like a really high GPA, and they test well, and they graduate, and they get like a bachelor's or even a master's degree, and it's not even in a useless degree, which most of the time it is, because college students don't know what they want. And so they pick classes based on their interests, because they don't know what they're doing, right? They don't have a clear idea of what their goals are in many cases. But let's assume that all of that is clear. The problem is that if men are not going to school, and they're not graduating, and they're not realizing their potential at the same level as women, which I think has a lot also to do with the way education itself is structured, which is for the feminine and away from the masculine, right? This is, I think, a reason why men are not doing as well, or boys are not doing as well. When those women graduate, they're going to be looking for men, because most of them want to get married and start a family. It's just reality. It's just the way we are. Men are the same way, right? Except the difference is that what women look for in men and what men look for in women are completely different. And so in the 1950s and 60s, when men went to college and women didn't go to college, or at least not as much, did it actually work out against their favor? No, because why? Because women were looking for men who were high status, had high earning potential, made good money, had a good job, right? And could essentially communicate to her, I'm going to be able to support you and support a family and buy us a nice house and get us two and a half cars and a picket fence and all that, right? And so the women will select for that. And what the problem is that even though, and of course, what men were looking for in women was that, she not be a beast. She like takes care of herself. She looks good. And therefore she has good genes. Therefore he's going to get, she's going to give him like healthy children. Right. And that she be nice to him, that she love him and care about him and, want the best for him and by extension, their family. That's all that men look for in women. And it's honestly what women look for in men in terms of their earning potential and their status and whatnot, right? So when men were going to college more and women were staying at home more, that worked out because it just so happened that men were chasing the thing women wanted and women were hopefully chasing the thing that men wanted. Now, today, you have the reverse happening in terms of education, which does impact earning potential for women, but it's the women's preferences and men's preferences have not changed. So the things that women are pursuing, career and money and status, are things men don't care about in women. They're not interested in that. They don't want that. It's nice, like they'd see it as a bonus, right? Oh, you have a good job, right? But it's not like what they like about women. What men like about women is, their reproductive fitness, their looks, their personality, because that will tell them if she's going to be a good mother to the children. And, if she's directing her compassion and her, let's say, her nurture towards the man and his kids. So he doesn't care about how much money she makes or, how educated she is. And inversely, women are looking for men who are earning more than they are earning. Well, if more women are getting degrees than men, they're not going to find that. And it's not just money too, because a man could go into the trades, right? And he could become a plumber or an electrician or an air conditioning operator, repairman, or whatever. And you could make really good money doing that. Okay. Like, I strongly suggest that if you're a guy and you're looking for something to do and you like to work with your hands or you don't mind getting them dirty or whatever, you might want to look at those kinds of careers, like the trades, or you could be a truck driver. And you can make really good money doing that. But the problem is that women don't only look at the money, they also look at the status. And so being like a guy in a white collar job, as like someone who works in a large corporation in some comfy air conditioned office, or a lawyer or a doctor or a surgeon or a psychologist or whatever, women are going to see that as higher status than some blue collar guy that is, fixing the pipes. And so the problem is that if men are not pursuing those higher education careers, then women are going to find a smaller and smaller pool of men to draw from that they're attracted to. So this literally, and it's like Dr. What was his name? Charles, I think it's Charles Dutton. I might be wrong about, I know his name is Dutton. I just don't remember the first part. Edward Dutton? It might be Edward Dutton. He said that it's an evolutionary mismatch. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's evolutionary. I think that our tastes in the opposite sex haven't really changed that much. I mean, there are outliers and all that. You can find a woman that that wants to be the breadwinner, and you can find a man that wants to be the house husband. I'm not saying that never happens, but the truth is that's unusual. Like, women generally want men to continue to be providers, protectors, right? And so that's the problem, right? The problem is that women's role has been allowed to change, but men's role has not. And the reason for that is because the only way that men's role could change is if women en masse said, this is what we want. We want men to be stay-at-home dads. And the truth is, that is not what women want. It's just not. So because women, we don't have the testicular fortitude to say to women, if you want to pursue these kinds of careers, you're going to have to adjust your expectations of men, because we don't have the ability to do that. And we don't. Okay. Like, I mean, I'll do it, but I think most people just don't, because they're terrified of telling women what they should do, or giving them advice, or suggesting that maybe their expectations are unrealistic, right? We don't, like, most people can't do it. They're terrified of it because they don't want to be called sexist. And so they don't. But we don't have a problem doing that to men, because men, they're not going to get upset, and they couldn't cry sexism even if they wanted to, because they'd be laughed out of the room. So because of that, we're going to run into some really serious problems. So just bear in mind that I think you guys know this stuff already. It's not like shocking, but I thought, I wanted to talk about this because I think this is really crucial. There are going to be problems. There are going to be problems. And here's another thing that I wanted to say too. It's about the trades and the blue collar work that we often see women look down on. Okay. Women seem to think, or at least some women, girl bosses, they seem to be under the impression that their job as a human resources middle management director at some like marketing company, or at some advertising company, or even like a paralegal at some law firm, is something that lives and operates and exists independently of the work that men by and large do to keep our civilization afloat. And they are dead wrong about that. Because at the end of the day, and I think big tech is so ignorant on this because they don't realize this either. And they participate in these male shaming campaigns. At the end of the day, if there isn't like a bunch of men busting their ass, making sure that the water is running, the electricity is working, the internet is running, the roads are paved, you know, the sewage is operating as it should, and all of these other systems that operate in the background of our society, especially if you live in fucking New York or LA or something, without those men doing that backbreaking labor, if it comes down to the point where we go into survival mode as a society, those white collar tech jobs are going to be the first ones to go. Because we're not going to need them. Because you can't be a human resources director or a fucking journalist if everything has gone to shit and everybody's wondering where their next meal is coming from. Because like the supply lines are broken. Because the farmers have basically just said, you know what, fuck this, I'm not doing this anymore. Right? And part of me thinks that should happen. Part of me believes that men should go on strike to some degree to basically be a reality check for these white collar employees, which women's tend to be attracted to as jobs, to show them without these guys doing this other work, your job is useless. Like nobody gives a shit if you're a fucking like, you know, play tester at Ubisoft if there's no electricity. So like, or internet, right? So like your blue check mark is meaningless if there's no Twitter. And like, I think that people forget that like very, very easily. So anyway, I think that it's just something that we should keep in mind. I do have some calls coming in, so I'm gonna take a couple of them, and then I want to talk a little bit about this Daily Wire article that talked about the boy crisis. And we'll get into it in a moment, but first, let's take a look at the calls. So put your questions in here. Swashberry, thank you. Am I in the question section? Swashberry says, wait, is that the right date? No, nobody's called in yet. I do see some people in here, so let me just send this through. I see Ligus Bookkeeping and Rudy the Drake in the screening room, but I don't know if they're gonna call. Okay. Doge, our boy Ligus Bookkeeping wishes to share with you a few books that he thinks are good for young boys, as well as a series of suggestions on how to compete with feminist scholarship. He also wishes to discuss his charity Books for Boys. Yeah, that sounds good. I'm going to bring him in right now. Bringing in Ligus Bookkeeping. I've seen him in the chat before, and I think we're friends on Facebook as well. So, hello, Ligus Bookkeeping. You are on the air. What is your take?
Hi.
Hey,
Brian?
how's it going? Yes, this is Brian.
Okay, good. Finally able to be on the show. As you know, I have a charity called Books for Boys. It originally started out as trying to get people to do a $250 mini scholarship for other people, but found that this was a more effective way of helping boys.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
Books.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's a really great idea. You know what, there is something a little sad about it, but maybe there are ways to like work around this. I think the boys that probably need those books the most are probably the least likely to get them, because they're most likely to be raised by single mothers, and single mothers may not be able to or interested in you know, doing that for their sons, like, you know, getting them access or even like homeschooling them or anything like that. But I'm not using that as a means by which to dismiss what you're offering, because I do think it's important. I do think it's a good idea. So, what are some examples of your books for boys? What makes them different from, maybe the kinds of books that kids will read in school?
Okay, one, I know you talked about classics before. That's one of them. Another one, there are some modern good ones, which love. Is one of them is Neil Gaiman, which teaches young boys how to be fathers. It's called The Bod. I think it's called The Bod. It's about the first part's like very violent because his entire family gets killed in a ninja attack.
Really?
And he
Did you say this
escapes
is
through the window.
Neil Diamond?
Neil Gaiman, who does no
Oh,
Gaiman,
Gaiman.
Gaiman.
Yeah. Neil Gaiman. I call him Gay. Isn't it?
Yes.
Isn't it Neil Gaiman? Yeah, I know who that is.
I
Okay.
do not know.
Okay.
I do not know. But and then he escapes into a cemetery, and all these different ghosts and monsters come together to help raise him.
Uh-huh. Okay. So kind of a bohemian
And the
parenting situation.
and the father figure is very strong in his life, so it's really good, that one. But we have a similar interest. One of my favorite books was Treasure Island growing up. Then it switched to kind of Monte Cristo.
Oh, it's a good book.
Afterwards I realized, well, not kind of Monte Cristo, and then also Tale of Two Cities. But then I really hated Tale of Two Cities because of the ending, because Curtin was such a wimp that he gave his own life for a woman.
Yeah, I mean, Tale of Two Cities is rough at the end, but like the kind of thing, what we're touching on is that because I do substitute teaching on the side, and I've done a number of English classes in middle schools, as well as reading courses in elementary schools. And what I've noticed is, firstly, none of the books that these kids have to read, and I want to point out that this part of Virginia is pretty libertarian, so it's not like a far left section of the state. So it's pretty libertarian out here, and very conservative too in a lot of ways. And yet the books are books I've never heard of before. They're all very recent, and they all deal with things like, anti-bullying and emotions and slice of life and things like this. And the boys are just not interested. They get bored. They get distracted. They want to be anywhere else but reading a book about anti-bullying. And
well, do you want to know how to get them interested in reading? It's very simple. Just pick up a book and read in front of them during your break. Once they see a man doing it, they're going to start getting curious. And then they're going to start looking, and they're going to start asking you. And then say, hey, look, I have a spare book here. You can have this.
Yeah, for sure. I just think that if you want to keep boys engaged, we have to give them stories they want to read. And I believe that what boys like, they like nonfiction. They like books that, even if it's not a science class, if it's an engaging book that has like an interest in science. Like when I was a kid, I used to love reading about the solar system, the planets, and dinosaurs. Those were my favorite things, right? I don't know if you guys get it, but when I was a kid, if you wanted to put an educational book in front of me that I would get into, make sure that it either has planets or dinosaurs in it, and I'm going to read it. But aside from that, boys also really like adventure stories, things with action and, about chivalry and knighthood and swashbuckling. They like Treasure Island. They like Jules Verne. They like The Time Machine. They like horror. They want to read maybe not Dracula because it's a little bit heavy, but like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and stories about war. Those are the things that boys want to read about, and that those just don't exist. Like they're not on curriculums most of the time. It's not just, when you hear about like a book like let's say, what's the book I'm thinking of? A book like Huckleberry Finn getting banned because it uses the N word. That's a problem because I don't think that it's good for us to avoid things because they make some of us uncomfortable. Especially because the book is really good and the larger lesson is missed if boys don't read it. But there's also there aren't just books being banned. There are books that are just not being introduced. They're not being put forward as books that boys should read. And the thing is, these new books that they do get them to read are actually at a much lower reading level. So the vocabulary is less interesting. It's very simplified. It's like a step above Dick and Jane. And so they're reading at a lower level in general. So they're almost never going to get to the point where they want to read something like, Flowers of Algernon or Of Mice and Men or Animal Farm, because they're not going to be able to read at that level. And that's another problem. And I think it has a lot to do, again, with the way that teachers and the way that schools educate all of their students, which is female focused, it's female oriented, and the girls, they always do better. I mean, they always do better because, the education system is more or less organized around a girl's needs, and it's good for them. I'm glad. I don't want girls to be just as bad off as boys are, but boys really do need a lot of help. So, I like that you're doing this. I think it's very important.
Well, there are some teachers that are trying to buck the trend. There's an organization that I use to try and find people to help called DonorsChoose.org.
Yeah.
So one of the things I do to help, I was telling your screener that I use the system against them to help. There are a couple of ways that I do this. Amazon, Craigslist, Google, they all do this. They have like a week where they will double any reading program.
Mm-hmm.
So I look for ones that have the phrase "books for boys" in it, and then I take the donations that I've collected all year and I donate it that way. Then the ones that have books that really are not going to help them, because there was actually one that had like a feminist CRT book, and I thought this really was a joke. I mean, the feminist teacher in this Texas high school is going to be so blind.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that. Yeah,
blind,
of course. Go ahead.
But you are in Virginia, where I wish I could find this school. It's actually a model school, the boys' reading program, and there's also another one in in Washington D.C. of all places with a female teacher.
Wow.
Female principal saying that, saying he wanted to be a doctor. Says, well, you need to read more. It's going, yeah, but none of the books I'm interested in. So she got books that he was interested in. He started reading and then started explaining to his friends. And then they ended up starting a book club for the boys in there.
That's great.
Yeah, Washington, D.C. So,
I've actually been looking into...
That is one way.
Yeah, I've been actually looking into programs like that around here because I'm not... Washington, D.C. is about 3 hours north of me, and I'm in the southwestern part of Virginia, whereas Roanoke. And I was looking to see if there was anything like sort of local, and there are... it's mainly focused on black boys, but I think it's for any, and it is about like reading programs, and the guy who runs it, he sees the same issues that you see and I see, and he's trying to like get boys interested in reading, because he believes that, the more, if you have a very solid grasp on the English language, you're going to be far more successful in reading and understanding reading and the structure of ideas, which is what reading it really is, right, in a written form, is going to help them succeed. And so he has been bringing a lot of the stories that I brought up, these classics, as the antidote, because it's what boys want. Like you can absolutely suck them into reading if you give them something they want to fucking read. So yeah. So
Okay.
what's the oh, go ahead.
The other way is using Title 9 or Title 11? You know, the one that they use to get men expelled from school.
Title 9.
Just on Title 9. Yes. The same thing with sports applies to books and reading materials. So if they're asking for a lot, you just send them a letter saying that you want to see how much money they spend on books for girls and how much money you spend on books for boys, and you can see how quickly that program gets funded.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yes, because they don't want to reveal that they spend far more money on girls' educational programs than boys. I've actually had a program from my own former alma mater canceled because they did not want to have to deal with the girls only and boys only thing again. Because they were trying to do STEM for girls only.
Yeah.
And since they are the largest supplier of education to the military, it scared them.
Of course, yeah.
St. Leo University is the largest supplier to the military for education. And they don't want to lose that big, juicy government contract.
Yeah.
So that's why. But sorry, I interrupted you. What were
it's okay.
Questions that you've had?
I was just gonna ask because I got a couple more people with questions. So I wanted to ask you, do you have a website or a fundraiser or something for this drive? Because I do think that this is important. It's a Facebook page. And what is it?
Yeah, it's booksforboys.org on Facebook.
Yeah, okay.
And then the type of fundraiser is just selling T-shirts with boys' inspirational messages on them, like boy power, or boys are adventurers, scientists, all these things. And last one is boys are readers.
Okay.
So if you go on to scholarship.org, booksforboys.org on Facebook, you'll see that you can see the different teachers. There's only 5 of them. But like I said, you can just do this yourself by going through donorschoice.org right until March. So you can double your contributions. You can also make your own donations and start your own program and take as much as a $250 charitable tax donation, because you don't need to provide a receipt for anything that's $250 or less.
Yeah.
If you hit the 251, then you need to provide a receipt.
Yeah.
So that's the situation. So you just go to the library, put up a sign saying, "Hey, I'm starting a boys only book club. I'm providing the books. This is the books. Please send me the boys." And believe me, how many single mothers are going to want to drop off for free 2-hour babysitting?
You know what? That's a pretty good idea. Okay. Like I said, I think it's a good idea. And I'm for men being a part of that, like you said, mentoring, reading the stories, that kind of thing. Because I think that, like, for example, there was one, this will be the last thing I say on it, then I'm going to move on to the next person. But there, in one of the classes that I was subbing for, there was a boy that he did all of his reading for the class that he was supposed to. Although he wasn't like a huge fan of it because of, the content wasn't interesting, but he did it because he was supposed to do it. It was the assignment, right? And so he had nothing to do. And he said, "Do you mind if I read something else?" And I said, "No, go ahead." And he pulled out a bunch of comic books, Superman to be specific. And he was reading Superman comics for the rest of that period. And I was like, watching that, and I understand it, but this, like, it speaks directly to the thing I'm trying to get across. He read the Superman comics because that was something he was more interested in, which are essentially tales of adventure and heroism. Now, some people might say that, well, they're also comic books, they're not books, so there's a lot of pictures, and those are also part of what draws men in, because men are visual creatures. We like to see images. But that, I think that is part of it. But like the stories I like to read did also have smatterings of artwork in the book, which I don't think you really see as much these days. But also there's something else to consider. If you know that boys are trying to escape stories that aren't interesting to them by reading comic books, then you might, if you know what's going on with comic books, you might have an idea of how bad that's going to be for boys too. Or at the very least, how it contributes to this kind of indoctrination that goes on in education, in particular of boys. Because the thing about comics, and I'm just going to say this on a brief tangent here, people are always talking about get woke, broke, go broke with the comic industry, and how, like, how the woke stories seem to be like the dominant stories and all of this other stuff. But the thing is, the people who do this stuff, they're not interested in profits. They're not interested in making money. I mean, if they do, then that's fine. It validates their worldview is popular, but it's not really the goal. The goal, and this is important to note, the goal is to get comics as they write them, as indoctrination and propaganda. Their goal is to get that into standardized curriculums. It's to make it part of education. It's why they push for these things to be put in public libraries and schools, which they do. There are comics and graphic novels in schools that are part of this wider narrative, right? They tend to be feminist. They tend to be, pro girl power and things like that. And the goal is to basically make it to where these kinds of narratives are inescapable. And the stories that this boy, because he had to read older comics, I mean, he had as a father, and I think his father bought them. And I was like, thank God. But like, if he gets in anything more recent, he's going to be like, what is going on here? So like, while it's a good idea for us to try to provide boys with alternatives in the culture, I think that we also should point them in the right direction in terms of their literature as well, because I think that it is a big important part of a child's learning, and we should be giving them the stories that they're most interested in, because it's going to make them, better students and better human beings later. So anyway, Ligus, do you have any final thoughts before I move on to the next person?
Yes. Two things. One, my pronunciation is Ligus, and two.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Two. Don't worry.
I'm sorry.
Don't worry.
Okay.
Two, if you're gonna start one at the library, before you start one at the library, immediately go get a criminal background check to prove that you are a non-threatening male.
I did, because I had to do it to do the subbing.
Okay.
So I do have one. Yeah.
I know, but I'm telling that like they're your listeners.
Oh yeah.
First thing you do is do something to protect yourself, because you don't have to get everybody to believe you. You just have to get the right people to believe you, and wham, you're in trouble.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you.
Protect yourself and CYA.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Legis.
Okay.
Legis Bookkeeping.
Yes.
Yeah, booksforboys.org on Facebook. Go check it out. I do think it's really great work, and you should keep at it.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to move you back. All right. I got a super chat from Amasang for $5, and he says, planets and dinosaurs, almost like a Jurassic World. No, wait, go back. Thank you, Amasang, for that super chat. I heard someone mention Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter in the chat. I think Harry Potter is actually it is a pretty good story, and I think boys could get sucked into it. Lord of the Rings is a little heavy, but if they read The Hobbit first, and The Hobbit is more like a fairy tale, I think it might be the better introductory story. And then, because this is another thing that boys love, they love to see worlds, like world building, and like shit. Nobody does world building like Tolkien, like nobody. So I think that they could get really sucked in, and there's shit in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings that are not in the films, but it's always helpful, and that make the books a bit better. But it's always helpful to have like a different kind of medium out there. So if they read the books and they've never seen the films, maybe they'll want to after that. So they'll probably just point out the inconsistencies. Where the hell is Tom Bombadil? Okay. So let's take the next question. Doge, our boy Rudy the Drake, asked this a while ago and wants to ask it again. Note, this is a copy and paste, but the question hasn't changed. If Brian would ever do a Badger Lodge again, I'd like to ask him how you're supposed to convince people that our current society prefers females over males when everyone just assumes the opposite. All right, I'm going to bring Rudy the Drake in here. I think he wants to come in and talk. It doesn't like it only, so let's do it. Hello, Rudy the Drake. Welcome to the call. What is your take?
Hi, Brian. I have not heard the show because I have to like be ready to jump on, so can't listen to the show. I have to talk to the screening.
Fair enough.
So I'm here with a question that I posted in a show chat a couple of days ago, but I don't expect you to remember, so I'll go ahead and repeat it. So if I were to try and red pill someone, and like it's historically I've never been very good at convincing anyone of anything, but if I were to make an attempt to convince someone else to share a bit of my worldview, what methods can you think of to try and convince someone who believes that our world favors men and hates women, and that everything is patriarchy and all that? How would you convince them to actually see that really it's kind of more the opposite, that society venerates women and denigrates men? Like there are some obvious strategies that I can think of, like pointing to disparities in criminal cases and so forth, but those don't seem to be very persuasive for whatever reason. So can you think of some other ideas?
Yeah, it's not easy to do, because it's not that people are not willing to listen to like the factual data. It's that they're not going to be able to like put together that, you know, the narrative around women being oppressed historically is really, really overblown. And the narrative that men don't have issues is equally overblown. I mean, you might even say it's like literally a 1-to-1 thing. But okay, so this is the thing that I think tends to work. So most people, there's like different levels to the red pill, in my opinion. Most people are not ready to hear the statement, feminism was never about equality, ever. Most people are not ready to hear the statement, feminism is not something that was once useful in some previous period in time or currently useful in some other part of the world, right? Most people cannot reckon with that at all. So they're way They're just, and I mean, like, I'm talking about people who are red pilled on some things, right? Like, even people who are MRAs right now will try to convince you that, well, feminism is probably useful in the Middle East or in, you know, North Korea or China or in some
men
point
over
in history.
there or men back then. I remember.
Yeah, men over there or men back then. Most people, like, I would say like over 90% of people are not prepared for that conversation. So you have to, like, I think what works the best is I look at the people who are purple pilled and what it is that they think about the issues. I mean, they wouldn't even call themselves purple pilled, but I would call them that based on what they have said about men's issues and women's issues, right? So, for example,
the whole red pill, blue pill thing is probably not doing our side any favors, because it does kind of sound a little culty when we talk like that. So we might want to think about rebranding a little.
Well, I don't use it. I don't tend to use those phrases anymore, but I'm doing it now for the sake of brevity so that people watching know what I'm talking about. But I don't use that anymore.
Our community gets it, but the normies not so much.
No, of course not. But okay, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Joe Rogan is a good example of what I'm talking about. Joe Rogan does not like MRAs. He can't explain why, but I think I know. I think it's because Joe Rogan does not, it's not even that he thinks that they're just like feminists. It's not even that, although he might say that. It's because the fact that there are men that are saying, you know, men have problems, some things are not within men's control. There are systems that actively work against them that exist. Most of those systems are statist, right? I mean, that's really the bulk of the problems comes from the state and their preferential treatment towards women because women vote for them over men. And the fact that they can appeal to women as females, regardless of political party, in order to gain favor with those women, right? And so we know that that's all real. Joe doesn't want to see that, but if you bring up Phil Hartman, who's the comedian that was really good friends with Joe Rogan, they worked on that show together. I forget the name of it.
Yep.
And
News Radio.
Yeah, News Radio. Thank you. And that Phil Hartman was murdered by his wife and he got screwed over by the system that she weaponized against him. Or if you were talking to someone, and this has actually been a big wake-up call for a lot of normies, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. So you can find, I think the best tool, and this is what I'm getting at, it seems to me that the best tool to get people to even start thinking about these things, because you can't convince someone with a conversation or 2 conversations or 20 conversations even. The only way they're going to change their mind is if they are open to having it changed to begin with, which is not in your control or anyone's. We just don't know. And also that they are left alone with those thoughts, you know, and then they start to see anecdotes little by little that sort of like reinforce those ideas. And then they change their mind on their own. And then they act as though they did it without anyone's help. That's just how people are. They tend to be egocentric. They tend to think that they did it all themselves and that there wasn't any external stimulus that altered that. And that's kind of Joe Rogan, because he contradicts himself, right? He goes, oh, I just want to grab those men's rights activists and say, you have them all. You have all the rights. It's so funny. Aren't I clever and smart? But also, Phil Hartman did get fucked over by his wife really bad. And that's a real problem. And divorce and family courts, they really aren't in men's favor. So like, even if Joe contradicts himself, he's saying the right thing there. Will he ever like fully like, you know, figure this out? Maybe not. I mean, because he still has to feel as though he's in control. And this is a problem that men have. They struggle with the notion that there are things that they cannot control that are obstacles, and that women are willing to use those things against men, because men want to think that women have the same expectation of nobility and of honor and integrity that is on men. Not that all men live up to it, but we have an expectation of men, right? To behave a certain way, to not exploit things, to destroy people, to not engage in the same kind of tactics that women tend to use. And so men that don't do it, a lot of times they're not doing it because they were told they can't do it because it would be shitty. And so they don't. But we don't do that to women. So women will use whatever tools are at their disposal to accomplish whatever goals they have. And not only do we not see that as something that is, deserving of disdain or scorn or judgment, but we promote it. We say, you go, girl, you did what you needed to do, right? And so we incentivize bad behavior in women and we discourage it in men. And you get these disparaging or these disparities in these various institutions like the family courts and child custody and so on. And so like what seems to work, and this is what I do with my friends, not that I'm like playing some long psych, what do you call it? Like psyops with my friends. But like if I but what I do is though, I'll bring up a case where a guy that we know, like a mutual friend, got screwed over by his wife. And this has happened on multiple occasions, right? Where I've had friends that have gotten married and they were married for 10 years, 15 years, close to 20 years. And then their wife suddenly goes, I'm bored, I'm getting a divorce, and I'm going to take all the kids and half your shit. And it's happened like multiple times with people I know. And then I'll talk to my other friends about it, because we'll be discussing like this tragedy that happened to somebody that we know. And I'll be like, oh, look, women were able to do that. They were just, she told him, oh, we're not going to lawyer up. We're going to figure this out like, in a mutual fashion. Don't worry about it. And then she goes behind his back and lawyers up. And then she fucks him. And I'm like, I tell them, well, yeah, of course this is going to happen. And because they have seen it firsthand, I don't have to make a systemic argument like, oh, here's all the statistics on divorce. Here's all the statistics on child custody and who it goes to. And I don't have to do that. Here's the stuff on domestic violence, right? Here's the stuff on false allegations. I can just say, I would just tell them about the anecdote. Because that is actually, that's where I think anecdotes have the most power. And again, Joe Rogan acknowledges. Yeah, go ahead. What?
I was just saying, it's when they're personally relevant is when the anecdote is powerful.
Yes, because they know it either happened to them or they know a guy who it happened to. And that's like legitimately what has happened with people I know multiple times. And I mean, man, I could go into some horror stories, but all I will say is after they experience it, if it's the guy who was directly impacted, it's very easy to red pill that guy. I could just be like, you know why this happened, right? And they will tell me, yeah, man, like I didn't know women could do that. But I can also bring up these high profile examples, which is why I do this on the news show a lot, where I'll be like, well, look what happened to Jason Momoa, which is what I talked about the other day. It's like this guy was like the super Chad that women all wanted to bang, and now he's living out of his truck. It's an expensive truck, but he's living out of his truck. And so this means no man is immune. None. Like, it happened to fucking Johnny Depp. He was like the shit. Like he had more female fans than male fans, right? So just I think that the when you're trying to like change the minds of people in your life who I think that pulling from personal experience is what is going to be most effective. And then after that, they may go, if they become interested in this, they may go and seek out the data. And then the data will just reinforce what they suspected. And then they will really wake up.
I don't know if most people even care about data because there's so much misinformation and so much fake news flying around that it's really easy for someone who doesn't want to listen to you to just be like, oh, those statistics are wrong. You're just a conspiracy theorist. But anyway, what I was going to say, based on what you said, I would theorize, and maybe I'm completely wrong because I'm not really super familiar with Joe Rogan. I've heard him a few times. I thought he was pretty cool. Maybe I'm wrong. But But
I mean, he's
based
okay. He's okay. I mean, I
just
don't hate him.
based on the way you just described him today.
Yeah,
My theory, and I could be completely wrong, but I would say if he doesn't like men's activists or men's rights activists, then it means he doesn't hate us. So that's
right.
good. And it probably means that he's in the process of slowly, swaying under the winds and possibly being in the process of starting to topple down on our side. And that's not a
Possibly.
comfortable place to be in, and so that might be why he's resisting, is because he's starting to sympathize with us, and he's asking himself uncomfortable questions about what that means, because
Mm,
he's still plugged into the matrix. We're that's where the red and blue pills come from, is that movie. It's one of
yeah.
the greatest movies of all time, I think. But he's still plugged in, and he's like feeling the tendrils ripping their way out through his skull, and it's very painful. And so he wants to blame the person who's pulling him free, even though the real cause of the problem is the machine that he was plugged into all along, and he just didn't notice it until it didn't start to hurt until he pulled away.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Joe, I mean, okay, firstly, I don't care if he ever figures it out or not, but I will tell you what will likely, if anything does change him, it will be this. Joe will either have to continue to see this kind of stuff happen to the men around him, which, considering that he is a part of the Hollywood machine, he probably will see it more,
Uh-huh.
or he's going to have to be directly impacted. Like something will either happen to him, through his wife, or something else, like a relative or something. And then I think, because what he does is he basically says, oh, essentially those guys whine too much, but they have a point. So he's like on the fence with that, more or less.
Mhm.
Again, I'm not concerned with whether or not he figures it out, but I think that what it's going to take is pain and suffering. And the reason why I know that is because most men that are in the men's movement have personally experienced it. And that's what shook them out. That's what made them think, holy shit, like there are things that actively work against me because I'm a man. And there are, the even people that I thought I could trust, people who I thought were my friends or my wife, will turn against me. They generally have less compassion or sympathy for me. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that I'm a man. A lot of men in the men's movement and related movements have been personally affected by this to some degree, whether it was, they were falsely accused, or they lost their kids in a divorce, or they were, called an incel or a creep. I mean, like it could be a little thing, but it becomes like a wake up call for a lot of guys. So
Tempted to insert the Gandhi quote that ends with "and then you win." I'm sure we all know it.
yeah.
But you also, if you don't mind a quick tangent, that brings up a sort of related question. You mentioned the word incel, and like what got me started on this topic is my frequent failures to convince anyone in pointless internet arguments, which I should know better than to even try. But one of the things that most personally burns my toast is the fact that so many people use the word incel as an insult, and I can't understand why people who congratulate themselves on how compassionate they are don't seem capable of responding to an argument that says, hey, maybe it's kind of cruel to mock these people for being terminally unloved and starved of human contact. And so I'm still trying to figure out, like, is there a better way to shape that argument so that it's not so immediately dismissed as, oh, you just think you're entitled to women's bodies?
Yeah. Well, of course, I don't. The thing is that the incel thing has been sufficiently propagandized as a term for the last few years, and it's hard
Yeah.
for people to unplug from that because they've been essentially told that incel equals entitled rapist, because that's basically what they think, right? Violent, murderous, misogynistic, entitled
Yep.
rapist.
That is exactly the way it is used by these people that I've been arguing with. And I really wish I could figure out how to make them not see that.
Well, it's so emotionally charged that, you know, that's why they go to it. So they don't really have I mean, I can only presume that they either don't have the logical ability to determine that maybe that's not what you are, or they know it's a good way to get you to shut up, so they just keep doing it. And I think that the only solution that I could think of,
it doesn't get me to shut up, but it probably does. It probably does drive me into further and further into non-successful arguments.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, like, try not to.
Ultimately, just as good as shutting me up.
Yeah, I wouldn't respond to the incel thing. I've been called that before, even though I'm married. And and you don't really need to like be like, well, I have a girlfriend and I fuck her every night. Like, you don't have to do that, because that just makes it sound like you're on the defensive. Just leave it alone. Like, ignore that. And you know what I do now? I say, well, that's not an argument, and then I move on. I say, you got to make an argument. You can't just call me a name, and your arguments are weak. So.
Not an argument.
But it's unfortunately a true name. But
what was that?
So I can't really. It is a true argument, even if it's not a true insult. So I can't claim to have a girlfriend. That's even if that wouldn't work. If it was true, it also is not true. But
true. But your success or failure with women has nothing to do with whether or not your arguments are good.
I think you're right that it doesn't matter. So.
Yeah, it doesn't. So, like, you don't need to respond to it. It doesn't matter. That your personal life is nobody's business, and you should just stick to, the argument. And then if they don't want to make one, then I say, get into the mud with them. This is what I do when people have nothing but insults and they cannot respond to my arguments. I just say, fuck off, commie, and I leave. And I don't leave, like I block it, but I just put that and leave it. And if they respond to it, then, that's the level they operate at. And then I got to ask myself, well, is that worth my time, or is a fuck off commie good enough? Because to me, it's good enough most of the time, because most people don't hold their positions because they've really considered all of the factors associated with it to come to these conclusions. Most people hold their positions based on a tribal desire to belong to a group that holds the same positions. And then they look at the landscape and they say, well, incels are unpopular, and people who attack people by calling them incels are more popular, and I want to be in the more popular club because I want to belong to something, and so I'm going to call people incels because I don't want to be in the crosshairs. I want to be the person with the sniper rifle, right? So they don't even know why they say what they say. So, like, they're not really worth responding to if that's how they're going to be. But if you just keep reminding them, you're not making an argument. You're just hurling insults. Nothing you're saying makes sense, and you frankly sound like a moron. Then maybe, even if they hate you for saying it, there is a very small chance that they might go and say, why do I believe what I believe? It's not likely, but it's, maybe a thing. But at the end of the day, you just can't control what people think, and you can't really change people's minds. I mean, you can put forward your case, and if they're not listening and they just call you an incel, they're not ready to hear it. So I don't know, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they want to be on the winner's side, and so they'll just call you a loser. Maybe I should just call them all the late Lord Frey, because that's what it is. They wait until the battle's over, and then they show up and they claim that they were on the winning side.
Oh yeah, like Commodus and Gladiator. Do you guys remember that? But in Gladiator, there was the battle at the beginning, right? This is how I do things. There was a battle in the beginning, and Marcus Aurelius is overseeing it, and Maximus leads the troops, and they win, and then Commodus shows up right afterwards, and he's like, did I miss the battle? And obviously he was supposed to be there, and he didn't show up because he's a coward. So yeah, it's sort of like that. But
I prefer Sabatons over sandals, but whatever works for you.
All right. Well, we're gonna move on to the next caller. Do you have any
Yep.
final words before I go? Or before I
I'm I'm
piggyback?
really looking forward to what the next caller has to say, assuming it is who I think it is. So
All
I
right.
will not keep you any longer. It was good to talk to you again, Brian. I'll be back.
All right. Talk to you later. All right. I'm only going till 8 because I haven't had dinner yet. So I'm gonna stop the questions after this. Jay Willie. Uh, no more questions. If somebody gets something in that's like a text only question, I'll take it. So, all right. Our boy, the Authenticator, wants to talk about his observations on the degeneration of the humanities as a field of academic study, both specifically in his state and more broadly in history overall. Okay, I'm going to bring him in. Authenticator, welcome. Welcome to the show. What is your take? Your audio working, sir? You're not muted. Can you hear me? All right, I'm sorry, Authenticator. I'm going to move you back. See if you can figure out your audio issue, if there is one. I'm going to move you back for now. All right, I want to respond to something really quick. Something else while they're figuring out the audio there.
I
Oh
think it's
yeah.
fixed now.
Oh yeah, you're fixed now. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, yeah. So what's your take, sir?
I wanted to talk about the curriculum really quick, the curriculum issue, because there's a lot of talk about the scholarship thing, but not so much about the particulars of the curriculum. And in particular, my specialization was always in the humanities, particularly philosophy. And I
Hmm?
and I noticed something kind of interesting about that, which is a lot of the shall we say, pseudo intellectual support for this feminist nonsense comes from the German and French philosophical schools that, in my opinion, I would estimate patient zero of is Hegel, because if
Sure.
you look at if you look at the Hegelian historical dialectic, his everything boils down to thesis and antithesis clashing over time bullshit. Every major philosophical fuck up in the last century or so boils down to taking that basic concept and swapping out the thesis antithesis MacGuffin for whatever MacGuffin happens to be convenient at the time. Marx takes it and adds economics and class, and boom, we have Marxism. Um, Fourier takes it and adds gender in, and now we have the first wave of
Feminism.
feminism, and on and on. The Frankfurt School takes it and adds culture and society, and boom, we have the Frankfurt School. Everything boils down to this stupid German and French idea of let's just dichotomize and reduce down all of history and never address any of the other variables. Derp.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. I could, and I did sort of briefly talk a little bit about how the quality of education itself is bad. So like even though people are getting degrees, they're also getting tens of thousands of dollars of debt, and the
Yeah, and
degrees are mostly useless.
yeah, and
So
to tie it into kind of the masculinity or male centric side of things for a second, or well, not male centric because that's a shitty term, but the kind of masculine perspective, as it were. Instead of teaching people like Socrates or hell, even Immanuel Kant, who is probably the last great philosopher in my opinion, um, philosophers who actually stand up to internally consistent rational scrutiny, they teach people like Foucault and Baudrillard and Hegel and
yeah, of course.
his, his various derivatives, and on it goes. And you'll notice that all of the philosophical texts written in the last 150 years are these lengthy word salad nonsense diatribes instead of here is my premise, here are the axioms that follow from my premise, here is my conclusion, and here's my argument for said conclusion. Like that used to be the bog standard for philosophy, which was make an argument and hold it to rational scrutiny, and then other people will come along and hold it to rational scrutiny. That used to be what philosophy was, and that also used to be what art was, and that also used to be what culture was, and that also used to be what civilization in general was. But
Yeah,
not
what
anymore.
reality was. No, let me ask you this, because I know you're talking about something important and something that I've talked about as well, even if I don't have like as deep of an understanding because I've never taken, a philosophy course. But without looking it up, without Googling or anything, or giving me like, the exact words of the text, like this is Starship Troopers, what is philosophy? Like, what do you think it is that this postmodern gobbledygook that we're getting now is not? How are these things different?
Okay, philosophy is, in like the simplest possible terms, if psychology is how the mind works, philosophy is how ideas work. And
Mhm.
in the same way that science searches for improving technology, improving quality of life, improving our understanding of the universe, philosophy seeks for the best possible ideas of things that generally don't fall under the sciences or other fields of study. Like in my opinion, the two places where philosophy has the most meaningful things to say are in morality and ethics and art. Those are the two areas where I think philosophy will always have the most to say, because religion only gets so far with it, and when you try to force moral discussions into the sciences, you will become fucked, as we are currently seeing in every facet of
Yeah. Oh,
civilization.
for sure, for sure. Well, I think that religion, I think, does, because it's actually really interesting. Like, um, the more I learn about like the symbolism and the meaning behind, say, Christianity, and like the more I notice that Christianity looks really similar to Greek philosophy. And I think personally it's because it borrowed a lot from it.
Well,
So there
yeah,
was a model.
I think
I
that's
know, and
his.
I'm not accusing you or anything, or whatever, but I just think it's really interesting that you had like the Greek philosophers, and they were men, and they were talking about, like you said, ethics. They were talking about morality. They were talking about virtue, which was a big one. I think it was Aristotle that talked about virtue a lot. And the Aristotelian virtues that he, and I'm sure his peers all admired and discussed, they kind of like became a part of Christianity, probably again because Christianity existed during the period of Rome, and the Romans were taking a lot from the Greeks.
And and
And
honestly, this is a bit of a sidebar, but I've always been of the opinion that the conversion to Christianity was one of the things that contributed to Rome's fall, because when you're a polytheist civilization and somebody comes along and says, "We rule you now. You can still keep your old gods. You just have to make room for this new one. We have the emperor."
yeah,
It's a lot easier than all your old gods need to be destroyed because they're false idols and blah 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 blah. So that's a complete sidebar, but it's just for the sake of throwing that in there because
no, it's
so
fine. That's fair. I mean, like all these things evolve, but what I'm saying is that there is a lot of parallels between the Greek philosophy and Christianity, which was informed by what the Romans kept, right? So you can see a thorough line, right?
yeah,
And
and
I find
it's
that to
also
be
worth noting
fascinating.
that I think a lot of philosophy, and this is something that I wish I could drill into the heads of the modern pseudo intellectuals. I think a lot of philosophy, if you explain it to people correctly, becomes intuitive. Because this is the number one thing I've noticed about modern day academia. They place such a high value on intelligence and completely forego usually the correct use of the intelligence you do have. And that's the thing.
Well,
And
it's elitist.
a simple person who is taught critical thinking and taught how to think, or taught how to use their faculties correctly, can run circles around someone who has a high degree of intelligence and is misinformed and dogmatic. Because
Can I make
the
a small adjustment? I would say that what you're saying is there's a difference between uh having a like being really good at, you know, understanding, like, you know, what's important in terms of your logical consistency, like, so someone who is well grounded in that, but there's a big difference between that and being educated, because I think that what we do, and I'm sure that the academics in the ivory tower, they're the main people that drive this, right? They say if so and so has a PhD, then they're better than you are. And the thing is that it's all measured based on education, but education is not intelligence. Education is just, I have a piece of paper.
And this is another thing I wanted to kind of tie into the broader, like, man the man specific thing. One thing I've noticed about all of these adjacent philosophies that can broadly be grouped under the heading of social justice, or feminist adjacent things,
Yeah.
is and I think you mentioned earlier about how the equality thing is rather inconsistent. There's a
Yeah,
way
well,
I can
it's impossible.
Well, yeah, but there's a way I can explain it that will at least make it seem consistent in their heads, which is,
Yeah.
feminists don't want equality to actual existent men. They want equality to their idea of men because they exist in a framework that is entirely conceptual and abstract, i.e., it's essentially the modern day intellectualization of the concept of the real man fallacy, i.e., if you don't live up to X standard, then you lose your man card. Well, that's what feminists do in regards to the equality debate. They take away a bunch of men's man cards because they're insufficiently, they don't qualify as man in their framework. And then they claim they want equality not to actual extant men, but to the top 1,1,1,1,1% of men that actually do fit all of their man criteria. And that's why they think that, for example, the people of Hollywood are a reflection of all masculinity, because that's the
Yes.
only masculinity they consider counts.
Yeah.
Any
Yeah.
anyone else is a blank. If you get your man card revoked, you're basically a blank human and are
Mhm.
inadmissible to discussion because you don't even qualify as an entity to
Yeah,
them.
you're like a pod person. Another reason why the feminists are always pulling from pop culture is because they're culture junkies, and so they don't really observe reality. They
Well,
observe interpretations of reality, and then they call it reality.
well, I think I'm not going to be making any enemies here when I say that as a nerd, I take exemption to the idea that they're culture junkies. That they use culture as a means to an end, and only as a means to an end.
Well,
They
yeah,
don't.
but they're junkies because they use culture to validate themselves and their worldview. So they
Yeah.
don't use it in the way that you might. Like you, I'm assuming because you're nerdy, you like to use certain aspects of culture that interest you to escape, and maybe even not just for escapism, although escapism is important. I'm not shitting on
Eh,
that. But
I
no, it has its place because sometimes you want to take a break from the
it
world.
does. It does.
Yeah.
It has its place, but I find escapism to be a double-edged sword because it adds to this notion of this kind of implicit ad hominem of, oh, you only like this because your brain is broken and you're looking for an escape. That's the problem I have with the escapism argument is it was originally used by people like Frederick Wortham, who
Yeah, I
completely
know.
and utterly
I know.
fucked over the comic book
But
industry to
yeah, he did.
basically
Or he
invalidate the
tried
entire
to.
geek subculture. And I'm hesitant to use the escapism argument on
Well,
that basis because it's like it's starting from the premise that art needs to exist for a utilitarian or
right,
nihilistic
right.
reason rather than for its own sake on its own terms. And I
Yeah.
dislike that notion.
No, I don't disagree with that. I guess when I'm using the word escapist or escapism, for lack of a better term. But my point is that it's like any, like we use our hobbies and our interests when we want to like take some pleasure out of something, and we don't want to remain mired in the real world, like of
we
our,
want to make our lives better, and that's what art is supposed to do. Because art
that's what
is
it does.
essentially
Right.
Whenever a pastime or an object or whatever whatever MacGuffin you want to use for the term is more valuable than the base components in it. When it's been improved by craft or by skill to become more valuable than it originally was. That's what art is. That's what art and craftsmanship has always been.
I agree, and I feel strongly about art. But okay, so my point is, okay, so here's the difference. I think that when people want to enjoy a piece of art or a hobby or whatever, right? And that piece of art could be music, it could be film, it could be a painting, it could be sculpture, whatever, right? Video games, I think that those are art.
It's formative to who they are as a person, and then when someone goes fucking with it, predict it. It's loose because you're fucking with something meaningful to the person you're talking to.
Well, and good art, the one thing about good art is that it is a representation of reality. That doesn't mean it needs to be realistic. What it means is that the art, which by being beautiful, by being appealing, is saying something true. Right?
It makes some kind of connection to you, whether it's a logical argument, whether it's a meaningful emotional component, whether it's something we can I'm about to commit such a tautology, meaningfully call meaning. It registers to a greater degree than just baseline background noise.
Yeah. So like what it requires is to have something in it that draws us in, and if it's a story, it should be saying something that is true. And when I say true, I don't mean factual, right? It's something true about us, right?
You mean capital T, like metaphysically sort of true.
Yeah, so. Right. So like, Beowulf, which is one of the most well-known and oldest stories that we can look at. I chose it because I don't think that it's got any connection or necessarily any connection to things that we would consider modern trappings. It's not religious. It's a story of a heroic warrior and his fight against nature or earthly things. You could say demons. Man versus nature is basically what it is, right? Even though we don't know, and there's probably no reason to believe that what happened in Beowulf actually happened, the story persists over thousands of years. Why? Well, because even though what it's saying is not
something in the human condition, because it resonates with something in the human condition. It has
because it's true.
Thousands of years. Yeah.
Yes, because it's true. And so when we try to enjoy a piece of art, these people, their whole thing is to make sure that you cannot do that. So this is why they politicize everything, especially art. Because if it gets to the point where they have essentially infected every pastime, I'm trying not to use the word escapist, but because I don't want you to get hung up on that. But like every pastime, every interest, everything.
You said it, like I needed to clarify.
No, it's okay. And everything that we find beautiful, everything that we want to enjoy, they make it political. And the reason for that is to make us, first of all, not be able to determine what beauty is anymore. We forget what that is. And by the way, something that's beautiful is also
just hammer away at it long enough that it'll break, and we won't.
Yeah, and then we won't have. Yeah, and we won't have any place to escape into. We won't have a refuge, if you will. But like, The purpose of that is to make it to where we can no longer discuss what is beautiful anymore, because what is beautiful is also good. Even if like the subject matter itself isn't, because it's saying something true,
and therefore implies the absence of it to be bad, and that's a dichotomy, and they hate all dichotomies because they think they're oppressive.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. So they basically like want to make it to where we can't go anywhere to, recharge, find what is
this childish adherence to meritocracy of yours is just a childish affectation, and we're going to break you of it because we have appointed ourselves your parents.
Yeah, and it did kind of like start to really ramp up in the visual arts, which I don't have time to get into now, but it did happen. So like, here's the thing I wanted to, the reason why I asked you about philosophy. I believe that in order for philosophy to work as philosophy, in order for you to be able to call something philosophy, it should, because it's about ideas, as you said, it should pursue the truth first, right? It has to operate from truth.
Or at the very least, logic, which in and of itself can be a kind of truth, as we just
discussed. I would say that logic is truth, I guess is how I would put it. Like, because if you're basing your logic on a lie, then it's not logical. So right. It needs truth to exist, and so like it's drawing from that. Marxists and feminists, etc., commies, they don't like truth because it flies in the face.
Reading of philosophy, as I like to call it, because everything boils back down to Hegel and his false dichotomy bullshit.
So without, and if there are any Christians watching, you probably, your hairs are standing up on your neck on this, because the idea of God and Christ is based on a concept of the truth as something outside of us as humans, right? So if you're religious, if you're Christian, I think you get what I'm driving at, but you don't need to make a Christian argument to make this point. So like, Christians would say the truth comes from God. It doesn't come from us. We can't make the truth. The truth exists whether we're here or not. Therefore, it's something outside of.
It exists independent of humanity, and what the Christians would call God is perhaps more tidily explained in the Platonic or Neoplatonic philosophies, where it's like concepts exist independently of the people who think of them, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So why? Yeah, but why do Christians frame it this way? Well, because if there's no God, then truth is merely something that we create. And there was like I don't remember which philosopher it was, but there were two Greek philosophers. One of them would say that, I think it was probably Aristotle, but I don't know. But one of them would say that the truth exists whether we observe it or not, right? And the other one would say, no, it only becomes real when we observe it. And so, of course, if you go along with that as your, that might have been Plato, but I don't know. I
doubt it was Plato, because he was the guy who was like, no, concepts exist. Mathematical realism was derived from Plato. So I very much doubt.
Well, it's probably not him, but it doesn't matter. I'm sure someone in the chat knows. But the point is that when you remove truth as something outside of humanity, you invite postmodernism, because postmodernists are essentially playing God. They say, well, if I make a convincing enough argument with all of my rhetorical commie gobbledygook and you are convinced by it, then I have altered reality. I have changed reality to suit my rhetoric, right?
They do this thing I called trying to legislate the void. They create the nihilist void, the void of nothing matters, there is no meaning, and then they try to legislate that void to the point of, since there is no meaning, since all is void, all is null, I can get away with anything, and so I'm deciding that I should get away with this specific thing, and that's where they pick the MacGuffin. Marx.
And this is how humans end up playing God. And literally some of them become gods. Like Mao, right? He basically like made all the education about him as though he was a messiah, and although he was God, right? He basically replaced God with himself. And Kim Jong-un and his father and his grandfather, they all did that too. So and again, I'm not making the case for God here, but what I'm saying is that the two schools, the two things that you're looking at in philosophy, in the humanities, if philosophy is to be because I think philosophy has a place, right? I don't think it's a bullshit major, but I think it was one of the earliest things to be corrupted by this ideology.
And that's exactly why I actually left college, because they kept trying to force me into, Hegel and the entire Hegelian wing, or the French wing that started with Rousseau and went on to people like Foucault. They're better than Socrates and Aristotle. They're better than Kant. They're better than Descartes. And I'm like, but Descartes and all the rest of those followed the rules of premise, supporting axioms, extrapolation to a conclusion, and argument for said conclusion. Like, that's basic philosophy 101 shit, in my opinion. And I get really frustrated whenever anyone fails to do that.
Yeah. Well, the problem with the postmodernists is that they basically like dominate philosophy in college now, making philosophy mostly useless in colleges now. And it's because they're not doing philosophy. They're just doing communism.
They're not even doing communism, because communism is just another derivative of the Hegelian dialectic.
Right. It's they're doing Hegel, which is like why they push the other shit through that. But it's not.
Which is why if you remember anything from my section tonight, folks, let it be this: the term cultural Marxism makes no fucking sense, because Hegel's historical dialectic already applied to culture when he conceived of it, and then Marx took it and made it economic. So, in short, cultural Marxism, not a thing. Marxism.
So are you saying that we shouldn't use the term?
Well,
if I can't use the term cultural Marxism, how do I describe it to other people who commonly use the term cultural Marxism and also get them to understand what I'm getting at?
Economic Hegelianism is what Marxism was. So I would just call it reformist Hegelianism, if anything.
Okay. I mean, I guess we could do that, but I think that it's kind of like I know it's a tall order, because most people just use commie nonsense, cultural Marxism. I think we all know, like on I think we all know on like even if it's just like an instinctive level, that we're all talking about the same thing.
I'm just saying, just so you know, Marx was not the originator of this bullshit. Hegel was. And even Hegel, you could probably go back as far as Rousseau and claim that Rousseau's social contract theory had a baby with tabula rasa, the Lockean concept of tabula rasa, and that's where this bullshit essentially stems from. If you wanted to go back even further than I go, but
it might even go way further back than that too. I mean, there are probably Greeks that were like, doing things similar to this. I think one of the mistakes we often make is thinking that because we're living in the modern days that we're smarter than people that lived 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, people haven't changed much in the last several thousand years. We're no different now, really, as people than we were when we were living in trees or caves, because they've done psychological experiments with monkeys, and they've demonstrated, albeit simplified, but basically human tendencies, like the tendency for fairness, the tendency for preferring affection over more practical things a lot of the time. That's, your Harlow's monkeys and so forth. And if we haven't really changed that much psychologically since we were those kind of monkeys, it's a little bit childish to say, well, everyone else was just stupid and didn't have enough of the right technology and stuff. To which my point is, they kind of did, because if you look at something like History Channel back when it was good, had this show called Ancient Discoveries, and a lot of the modern technology we use, like electricity for, they just use like steam power and clockwork for. So even things like technology, the biggest advantages modern times have are the capturing of electricity, and then possibly the mass production line, and of
Yeah.
course the internet. Those are
Yeah.
the three biggest inventions that separate us from our ancient ancestors, and that's a very thin line in historical
Mm-hmm.
terms.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I'm going to say one last thing on it because I got to bring in one more caller and then wrap this up.
All right.
Um,
Before I go, can I show for my channel, because I have a YouTube
yeah.
channel?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Opportunity to say your one last thing, and I'll show. I
Oh,
don't want
okay.
to interrupt
So
you.
the last thing I was going to say is that, ultimately the problem I think is that in order for a philosophy course to work, it must draw from truth, and you have to be able to talk about um, the goal being you start from truth, you end on truth, um, and that anyone who's not doing that, I don't think they're doing philosophy. I think that it's pointless to talk about things when facts don't matter, and that's sort of like what is going on with all of this, BS, which I won't even call philosophy. The other thing I was going to
No,
say
it's
is
good
that
philosophy,
if it's
definitely.
if it's drawn from that same structure, then the philosophy shouldn't change much from culture to culture. So like if you are really into like Lao Tzu, as long as Lao Tzu was talking about stuff from the basis of truth, then his conclusions or ideas or whatever should not be that much different from Aristotle or Kant.
To be
So
fair, they aren't either, which is the
no, I
other
don't. I
thing.
would imagine they're not, because it's not like people in ancient China were having completely different experiences from people in ancient Greece. So I don't know that the East-West thing matters much. The other thing is, and I think of Christ as a philosopher too, um, in because I'm not
All,
really
all, all, all religions are essentially philosophy. It just so
Yeah,
happens
because
that one
they're
is more
basically
appealing.
they're basically, but I would say that religions are probably a little bit more prescriptive, like they're basically saying this is how you live a good life,
Yeah,
whereas
more.
philosophy is not trying to do that, although that may come out.
Philosophy is to be the
Buddhism
tool.
or the Buddha is a good example of that too, because a lot of people think of Buddhism as religion, and some people say it's a philosophy, and I mean it's probably a bit of both. I don't know. My wife knows more about that than me. But I imagine, and I'm basically talking about how we're more alike than different. I imagine Buddhists and uh, Taoists and people who are interested in ancient Greek philosophy, or all of the things that came from that were still using it as a basis, and Christians that really like try to understand Christ and they're not just Bible thumpers. They are probably like all on either the same page or similar pages. Like there are
Yeah,
prayers that I've seen Christians do that look just like meditation, for
yeah, and
example.
and and,
So
and, while, and while we're on the sort of spiritual side of things, someday we're gonna have to do one of these where I come on and talk to you about how I absolutely hate the feminist adoption of things like occultism
mm,
and magic, because I have been a practicing occultist for 15 freaking years, and I'm basically the only occultist that I know that actively goes into like the men's rights stuff. I'm just like,
of course. But
God dang it.
do you have your third level spells yet? Because Fireball's powerful. I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
I
Um,
I know.
don't take haste.
D&D actually got the
Take
concept of
Fireball.
mana from Polynesian mystical philosophy. So
Yeah.
as far as magic is concerned, the only thing that's different about universes like the D&D universe or the Marvel and DC Comics universe is that there's more ambient magical energy to throw around. The like actual mechanics of it are functionally the same.
Okay. Well, yeah, maybe call back if you want next time I do one of these, and you can explain it to me. But I am more interested in the culture of this because, of course, I assume it's feminist. But because, well, anyway, I can't go any further. I'm gonna have to move you back. So thank you, Authenticator. Really interesting conversation. I'm gonna
Yeah.
move you back into the screening room. Okay.
Wait, I was gonna show
Oh
quickly.
yeah, shill. That's right. Go ahead.
Um, Hi guys, my name is Dalton Mortimer. I'm the Authenticator. My channel here on YouTube is called The Authenticator. I'm weird professionally, basically. I talk about philosophy and magic and the occult and geek shit and politics and usually a mixture of all the above. I also guest star on a bunch of people's channels that you might conceivably have heard of, like Comics Division or Anglantine from I Love Comics. And I keep
Cool.
all that stuff in playlists on my channel, so please do give my channel a watch. I only have 150 subscribers, and I would like more, and I would like more active subscribers as well that actually like and comment and things. So
Yeah.
if you're interested in any of the shit that I've said thus far, I say a lot of more things like it on the regular over on my channel and other associated channels, which again are in playlists. So cheers, guys.
All right. Thank you, Authenticator. Guys, check out his channel. It's just the Authenticator on YouTube. All right. I'm going to move you back. Have a good rest of your day, man.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Last one. I'm going to bring in Jay Willie briefly. Sorry, Jay Willie, I can't take this one too long, but he says he wants to discuss how even if discrimination in college is not intentional or targeted towards men, it's usually the men who suffer due to factors like neglect and apathy towards masculinity and maleness. Yeah, that's all true. I want to bring him in, though. Hello, Jay Willie. I already read your question out, so we could just jump into it if you like, unless you want to say it again.
No, it's fine. We just jump into it.
Okay. So I was just going to say that, yeah, you're right. I mean, first of all, the discrimination in college is a problem, but the discrimination for men starts much earlier. In fact, I've been thinking about like ways to like spice things up. And I think what would be good is a series called From the Cradle to the Grave, where we will talk about every single men's issue from from before the time they are born until they die. And because by the time men are like trying to decide whether or not they even want to go to college, they've already been, I think, significantly demoralized. So what do you think?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Very true. Because society today is completely broken, in my opinion. And what I mean by that is that the values that at least Western societies have are inconclusive. They are broken. They don't align with common sense, in my opinion. And I think that is going to have a very, very dramatically negative effect on men and women, actually. But it's like we focus on the guys now because nobody ever does. So yeah, I think there's a huge problem because people are led astray to believe in things that it's not meaningful and led away from believing in things that would be meaningful, and I find that to be a huge problem.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to fix that, and that's also partly why I am trying to pursue a degree, right? I want to get a degree in anthropology because when I start publishing after I get my degree, then I think actually I can do things good for the world. And a lot of people, things that you have been and other people here doing is like, what I would do is going to achieve good in the sense that you would think would be good, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that is a really good idea. I do think that more and more people are taking notice of this and they are talking about it. I mean, you only need to look at the popularity of people like Jordan Peterson, which I think was a big thing specifically because, at least to some degree, he identified what men were experiencing. And his resignation from the University of Toronto, which was a big public thing that everyone knows about, was specifically because the primary students that he was trying to promote or trying to support, and the people who are his biggest supporters, are men. And of course, because they are men, they were excluded by the university, even though like the claim was that it was because they were white men. And I'm sure the whiteness plays into it, but I think it's got way more to do with the fact that they're men, because there weren't any white women that were excluded. So, it's obvious that there is an issue, and more people are being made aware of it. And hopefully, we can't change academia, but I don't think that academia can sustain itself on this model. But men don't need it. That's the thing that's great about this, right? So, what were you gonna say?
Like I, for example, do need to get into academia in order to get my degree, and
Yeah,
I would prefer.
I mean men
to-
broadly, but yeah, I think that you
Yeah.
doing what you want to do and then using that position of authority to actively push against this is totally like absolutely crucial. So we need that
Oh, yeah.
as well. We need people fighting. This is what James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose and, well, I don't know Helen Pluckrose, she's kind of a feminist, but James Lindsay at least is doing, even if it's just him. I don't know what Peter Boghossian's up to. But yeah, you need that. Absolutely 100%.
Yeah, and that's basically what I'm basically thinking about. Sorry, is that even I think Western academia is lost. Like I will be studying in South Africa, so I guess it's a lot of problems when
Yeah.
it comes to academia there too. But I wouldn't say it's as bad as like for example, the United States, for example. I mean,
Yeah.
like it's like lagging behind in a good way, I guess.
Yeah, right.
So I'll basically say, and if it's going to be unworkable for me to work in academia in South Africa, which I don't hope it would be, but if it is, then I can actually go to another country. There are Asia, for example. There are, if I really want academia, Brazil is an example. So is South Korea. Those countries,
Yep.
in Japan, and Taiwan. These countries also have academics, right?
Mhm.
So like you don't have to go at the Western academia because that's a clusterfuck. That's just going to kapoof, because if you go to other parts of the world with equally developed academics, then
Or at least they're not as paused because they're not a priority. So
exactly, and therefore one can do good, because if they get the best from the West, right?
Yeah.
Because the West don't want the bad and not the good, then they can just surpass the West. And I do believe it's a good thing to say these other regions in the world that they should surpass and take over Western academia on the global scale of academics. That's
absolutely.
a very good thing if you think about it, because
Yeah, I agree with
it would
that.
be better for everybody involved completely.
No, I think that's good. I also think you should, even if you go into South African studies to do your work, which I think is a good idea, I think that we should also be more and more vocal online on the internet, because I think that internet learning is probably going to become the norm, and all of the brick and mortar Ivy League universities are going to have to adapt. And so if you're going to be doing this as like an instructor, going into anthropology, writing papers, I think that it's good that you're trying to build up places that are not the United States or the West, but rather something else, because we want to see it happen in these other places before they get infected. But also it's probably good to talk about these things online and be very vocal, because I bet that, let's say you go into teaching, I don't know if that's an interest of yours or not, but if you went into it, you'd probably attract a lot of men who are looking for something that's going to be more useful to them and more supportive.
Oh yeah,
of them.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, like for example, me, I'm not like, I do support Peterson and what he have done, and I think it's a good thing, and a lot of people, his supporters, I think that's a good thing, even though I technically don't agree with him on a lot of important things. I don't agree with him at all, but the point is you can still appreciate and support other people, right, and their academic work, even though I don't agree with it myself, even though I disagree with his ideas, I can still support them, right?
Yeah.
But that's the point. The problem with the Western leftists, the feminists, they can't do that. They can't say that's a different perspective and they can have it, and I'm gonna support their work to have their say and their publishment and their classes, right?
Yeah.
While I would, for example, I would support people I disagree with as long as they don't attack me, right? So if you mind, do you mind me explaining a little bit how much of a mess it's been when I was trying to get into college?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it's
If you
basically
could,
I told you.
if you could be brief, but go ahead.
Yeah,
Whatever you need
because
to
I
do.
remember telling you and the other badges a long time ago that it was failed. It was so difficult to gain, and I didn't really. I don't know if how long it was ago. So I don't know if that was when I failed, and I thought it was due to my gender discrimination, right? It was mainly due to other factors that time, and that was because the way I applied to college is extremely complicated, and I didn't get enough a good high school education that I should, and the way of compensating for that after I graduated was very difficult, and that's the main reason why I was so hard to access college, right? But even though that wasn't due to my gender, right? It was still like a guy who was, neglected. It was like a hard time to get into college, right? And that's still, a bad thing, even though it wasn't due to my gender. Like currently only getting to one South African university, right? And I find that a little bit weird. I don't like that. So now it might actually be because of my race and gender, possibly too.
Possibly.
That's much more likely now, but in the past it was mainly due to other factors. But now this is definitely, I think it played a part, because if I applied to 7, I got into 1. To say that if there were no affirmative action in any aspects, right, race or gender based, which I know there are, do I think I would have gotten into one of the other colleges? It's hard to say, but it's not. We shouldn't discount that as being a strong possibility. But I'm satisfied with where I got in. But the process of starting the college is still very complicated, and it's not really finished yet. So I'm not entirely sure if I will actually end up going this year. I really hope I am, because there are way of the things I needed to do. Like I had to take this English test because I didn't graduate high school in English-speaking country. So, and that only lasts for 5 years. So if I get this degree and want to get another one, I need to take the test again. But which is like so stupid. Like, how do I forget my first language, which is English? You know who I'm talking about. It's really weird. And like when it comes to college application, that's not a South African thing. That's a company that the university recognizes. This is international for people who graduated high school in non-English speaking countries, which is like really weird. So my point is that you have these problems that I have, not due to gender, and then you should add to that special scholarships or special or like affirmative action that goes against me. You basically just add more problems to the problems that I already have to deal with, right? Luckily, I am my family are of the financial opportunity to go to a South African university without having to, it's not that expensive for us, because it's the cost of university in South Africa are affordable for the income and the wealth of my family, for example, even though we're not rich, we're middle class, for example. And so I do benefit in that regard, but I do get things that get in my way for other reasons. And my gender is one of them, but it's not the only one. But the other ones just adds to it and makes it a worse thing than it would otherwise be.
Yeah.
So even if it's not due to my gender, if something is, and then you add other bad things to it, it makes, the gender aspect to that is just more bad things rather than just the regional bad things. But I don't want to put too much of this on the people who are working in the school system, because the people who are working, they didn't decide the rules. So a lot of them have been helpful in helping me getting access to an education, even though the rules have been kind of annoying and bad to a certain extent.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like I said, I think it's a good idea. I hope that, because I do know that South African politics are pretty bad. They're pretty bad for you.
Oh, yeah, it's so bad.
And
I would actually say,
but I mean, like, you don't own a farm, do you? I mean, I'm just.
Oh God, no.
Okay.
No, South African politics are a disaster. But basically, if I were to compare Western politics or Western countries to South Africa now, like, it's a really hard call. I don't want
Oh,
like
I'm
it's
not-
very difficult to say which one is
Yeah,
actually worse because
I'm
if
not,
you can take all the bad things about South Africa, if you compare it to feminism in Western countries. I'm sorry, but it's very difficult to find something worse than the Western feminism.
Yeah,
The Western feminist does not compare favorably to South Africa. Is my point.
No, I get that. And the only thing that's keeping South Africa from being an absolute disaster is if they figured out how useful feminism would be, to essentially further, drive these really terrible ideas. But I guess because I gotta move on, I want to answer some of these written questions. I appreciate the messaging, and I do hope that you get to what you want, and I hope that there are no further obstacles in your way. Do you have any final thoughts or anything you want to shill or tell the audience?
Yeah, it's like I could say that there are anti-male sentiment and anti-male laws and self-feminism in the country, which are a problem, right? But my point is that it's not even close to as bad as Western countries' legislations are in terms of gender. The narrative does exist, but it's not that pressing. It's not that widely accepted, if that makes sense.
Right.
But it's not absent either.
Is it because in the West, the main problem with feminism, I think, even though they do, use political power and political muscle against men, and there's all of these real, state enforced institutions that essentially treat men like cattle and slavery, basically because they redirect funds to women. But the main issue is a cultural one, because that's the main thing, in my opinion, even though the culture doesn't directly impact men, but it does, because it changes everyone's attitudes about men, and it shapes them, and it shapes history, and it changes the context, and then other people act on the new cultural norms. And of course, these are very old. The culture of feminism is probably like 100 years old or older, so it goes way back before even the suffrage movement. And if you want to know more about that, look up Studio B on YouTube. It's Janice Fiamengos and Steve Brulet's new channel, and they go into the history, the ancient prehistory of feminism. But yeah, so it's like a cultural problem that results in political problems. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I would say to that is that I basically were to take the racism and the sexism that I will get in South Africa, right? I will take that, right, above the extreme anti-male sexist laws in the Western countries any day of the week. Those are much worse than South Africa. I stand by that statement. That's what I absolutely believe, and I think they are much, much, much worse. That's horrible, much worse than South Africa's racism, in my opinion.
Yeah, sure. All right, well, thank you, Jay Willie. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm going to move you back into the screening room. All right, so I got a couple of written questions, and then I think I want to say something about this Daily Wire thing. So first, let me say the Daily Wire thing. I just want to make this brief. So the Daily Wire wrote an article called "Is There a Boy Crisis? Here's what Andrew Yang had to say." And this was like 4 days ago, so recent, okay? And I'm just going to jump to what Andrew Yang said. So Andrew Yang, who is no longer a Democrat, to my knowledge, my understanding is that he's gone independent. He said, men now comprise only 40.5% of college students and are failing in high school at much higher rates. There's a crisis among American boys and men that is too often ignored and is definitely going unaddressed. Okay? I think that, I just want to give you guys a little bit of context. I like what he says here. First thing out of the way. Obviously, this is good that he said it. I don't think it's all that risky. If he was still in the Democrat Party, it probably would have been. but I don't think it's all that risky now that he's an independent. But this is the thing that I think is really interesting about this, and this is the thing that makes me suspicious of Andrew Yang, okay? And I'm going to try and explain why in brief, because I think that people are getting a little bit too quick to celebrate this tweet. So, where did Andrew Yang get this number? Where did he learn this? I could tell you where he learned it. He got it most likely, and I don't know this for sure, but my guess is he got this from Warren Farrell. And the reason why I say that is because in 2018, I think, so it was before the 2020 election, and Andrew Yang was running for president. He was a candidate at the time, and I think it was like after one of the debates that they held with all the Democrat nominees, and Andrew Yang was among them, okay? Warren Farrell attended these debates because Warren Farrell is a lefty. He votes Democrat usually, okay? And so he attended these debates specifically to try to get any Democrat politician to address the boy crisis, the problems that men face. He was trying to get them to see it as a real important issue. He wanted their support, okay? And he had his book, The Boy Crisis, which was new at the time. And he went up to all of the politicians. He took pictures with them. He shared them on social media. He even had like some video. He spoke to Andrew Yang. He spoke to Kamala Harris. He spoke to Buttigieg. He spoke to, Mr. Hell yeah, we're going to take your guns. I don't remember his name. The guy who skateboards. All of them. Ted Cruz, whoever was running, or not Ted Cruz is a Republican, I'm sorry. All of the Democrats that were running, he sat down and he talked to them briefly, and all of them said, "Oh yeah, I think that's really important, and we should talk. And why don't you call my people, and my people will call your people, and we'll get this figured out and all that, right?" And I know I've told this story before, but I think it's very important that we remember this. Okay, don't forget this. So he told Andrew Yang about this. He was one of the people he spoke to, and then amongst all the other Democrat politicians. Now, he didn't go to any Republicans, so I'm not casting shade because they're Democrats, okay? I think that most of it is due to the fact that they're politicians, generally. I don't think Republicans would have given him what he wanted either, to be frank. But went to the Democrats because that's what he is. And Andrew Yang said, yeah, this is really important. We should talk about this. But when Warren Farrell went to follow up, and he said this in an interview, and he was very disappointed, although I don't know why he's surprised. When he went to follow up, they all turned him down. They said, "I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to work with you." Not just like get your issues brought up, not just that, just like no association with him at all. And do you know why? Do you know why the Democrats did that? All of them, including Andrew Yang at the time, because Warren Farrell's position on boys and men's issues would not go over well with two demographics that the Democrats needed in order to make sure that they win, right? Which was single moms and feminists. So they were like, we're going to lose the vote from single mothers and feminists if we support you, so we can't support you. So we can't promote your perspective, okay? So take that into account. Warren Farrell already approached these people, and they basically threw him aside because he wasn't going, he was endangering their voting bloc, which is single mothers and feminists, okay? They weren't going to vote for men's issues. The Democrats saw that, and they're right. And so they said, sorry, we can't work with you, okay? So then Andrew Yang brings up this statistic, which is literally from the book, The Boy Crisis, and he's acting like it's his statistic. So, I appreciate that he said it, but where was all of this integrity back when Warren Farrell approached him? In 2018. Could it be that Andrew Yang's position has changed? Possibly. And I mean, I'm open to it. And I'm sure that there's plenty to appreciate there. I do like that he said it. And I do think more people should. I don't know if it's going to win him any favors, though. I don't know that it is, because the issue of men's issues is that no one cares, not that no one is saying anything. And so if Andrew Yang says this, the Democrat position that speaking about men's issues is harmful to the Democrat platform because the large number of single mothers, by the way, something that Democratic policies created, that's going to hurt their votes. And feminists who just want to control the entire conversation around gender will never vote for someone who speaks about men. So just bear that in mind. You know, this is all about, like Xeranx just said, political expediency exceeds all. Thank you for the $2. That's kind of what it is, but it's also, it gives you an understanding of how, like, you know, how little the state can help us, because it's really, they're not built to benefit men, period. So we can't rely on them. And I thought, you know, look, maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you think Andrew Yang's completely changed and he's going to go full on MRA. If he does, I'd be very surprised and impressed, but I'm not holding my breath for that. So let me read these text chats really quick. I may not get to all of them, but thank you, Exxon. So, I would like you to address masculine going at it alone that is undoubtedly responsible for probably half of the following, some of which that I brought up in a previous call in the show a little while back: child abuse culture. Number 1, debtor's prison for college kids. Well, this is why I don't suggest that men go to college, unless like the discipline they're pursuing can only be, like, you know, seen as credible if they have a degree. But yeah, I mean, aside from that, I think that men should do what they can to minimize debt, if at all possible, and maybe do something that's just going to bring them profits, currency. You know, disregard wenches, acquire currency. Number 2, fast food minimum wage jobs are for high schoolers, yeah, even though MC or McDonald's is still open during school hours. In 1968, minimum wage could support a family. FDR, who signed the minimum wage law, said that it should provide for a comfortable life. Yeah, but it doesn't. Because human desires are endless and resources are limited. Number 3, I don't have the wherewithal to have a debate over this even now, but I got into a bit of a spat with a call screener, not today, where it wasn't even up for discussion over whether it should be legal for the Amish to raise kids in that culture, a setting that's precarious for informed adults. What's wrong with... So, like, okay, I don't know a lot about the Amish. So when I speak out and I call them based and everything, it's more to do with the values that I see. So is it possible that there are problems in Amish societies? Yeah, probably. But it doesn't mean that there isn't something in the model that they have that might be worth looking at and seeing how much of it we can use, because society, if it collapses, if it goes over a cliff, if the currency gets changed by the government, and that's what they're looking to do, if they're looking to put us in a post-scarcity society where everything's run by robots and we rent everything and we're told to live in the pod and eat the bugs, well, we have to offer people something. And maybe the Amish are onto something. It doesn't mean that we become exactly like them, though. So I'm not really sure, like, what you're arguing for or against, but I don't think that we should oversimplify this stuff. But if you are making the case that the state should be doing something instead, I direct you to Exhibit A, Andrew Yang's tweet. And also the fact that nothing the state does benefits men. They actively work against them, and they take all of their earnings and they give them to women, and they shame men afterwards. They don't support them. They don't help them get an education. They don't even have recommendations. So, I mean, I don't want to like put words in your mouth, XEN. I don't know what your position is, but I'm just going to respond in that way. Don't take it personal. If it's not about you, I apologize, because I probably just misunderstand what you're getting at. But thank you for the questions and messages, regardless. Last, Doge, our religious boy, Packer Tom, has something for you to read out. So he wants me to read this, and then I'm going to close it out. In the Gospel of John, all things comes from Jesus. So calling Jesus a philosopher is to undersell him, because he literally wrote the book at the beginning of time. All right, well, I get that you're religious. I have nothing against it. But based on what I understand, I think that Aristotle predates Jesus. I'm not being a smartass. I mean, I kind of am, but much respect, Tom. I appreciate your message nonetheless. So, let's see. I'm gonna wrap up the show here, guys. Let us know what you guys think about what we talked about on today's show. It went a little bit long, but I appreciate you guys hanging in there. If you guys like this video, please hit like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, hit the bell for notifications, and leave us a comment. Let us know what you guys think about the discussion today. I suspect that we're going to be doing a rant circular or something tomorrow. I normally would have done this on Friday, but again, Hannah was having problems and she's not available. So send us a message, or leave us a comment rather, and maybe make a suggestion for a topic for next time. If you want, in the comments, what you want to talk about, or what would get you interested in calling in. Let us know in the comments. So thank you guys so much for coming on today's episode of the Badger Lodge, and we will talk to you all in the next video.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.